In this section of our video, we're going to discuss the criminal privatization schemes of the New World Order. According to a July 2010 poll, 55% of the American people believe that Barack Obama is a socialist. But Obama and his co-conspirators in the New World Order are not interested in socialism, because collective ownership is merely a duplicitous means towards more profoundly devious and sinister ends. In his book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, Gary Allen explained that socialism is merely an intermediate step towards the neo-feudalistic private seizure and expropriation of public assets. Allen wrote, "If one understands that socialism is not a share the wealth program, but it is in reality a method to consolidate and control the wealth, then the seeming paradox of super-rich men promoting socialism is no paradox at all. Instead, it becomes the logical, even the perfect tool of power-seeking megalomaniacs. Communism, or more accurately socialism, is not the movement of the downtrodden masses, but of the economic elite. The reason for this is that under a socialist government, where there is nominally public ownership of a nation's assets, it is extremely easy to criminally transfer those assets into the names of the private banking cartel. After the international banksters converted the publicly owned assets of Chile and the Soviet Union into their own names, economist Michael Hudson explained how this criminal privatization scheme works. I might add that this same scheme has been worked in over 150 countries. The New World Order, through its puppets in the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization, has been working this scam all over the world since the 1970s, but recently it has come home to roost here in the United States of America. To recap, this criminal privatization scheme, where the international banking cartel effectively steals the publicly owned assets of the people and then retitles in their own name, is a five-step process. In step number one, the military junta and the bankster elites who control the country open up a privately owned national bank, just like our Federal Reserve here in America. In step two, the government places its cash into the same privately owned bankster-controlled national bank. In step number three, the target country puts its national assets and its national resources up on the auction block. In step number four, the private bankster owners of the national bank write a check to the government to pay for the nation's assets that are being auctioned off. And in the final step number five, the government then turns around and redeposits the check into the privately owned bankster-controlled national bank. Through this criminal sleight of hand, the nation's assets are no longer owned by the people, and the assets have been expropriated and converted into the names of the private owners of the national bank. And the banking cartel has therefore completed a cost-free seizure and illicit conversion of a nation's assets into private hands. An important variation of this illicit privatization schemes are the so-called public-private partnerships that George Bush was so instrumental in pushing here in the United States, where publicly owned assets and physical infrastructure are being stripped from the people and sold off piecemeal to foreign investors. Around the world since the early 1980s, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have promoted and often mandated the privatization of a nation's public assets, including tollways, railroads, airports, health facilities, electrical services, telephone services, and other services. What happens with these criminal privatization schemes is money that used to go into the coffers of the people are diverted into the hands of the private banking cartel. When the Dulles Toll Road was sold to Sintra, the money stopped going to the people and started going to the private owners of Sintra. Today, over 20 states there have toll roads that have been sold off to foreign banking, the private banking cartel, and 23 states have privatized their water. But the con artists who control the United States government are not content with the massive plunder of the United States. Institutional fraud is now one of the leading exports of the U.S. government. For example, in the 1990s, economist Larry Summers, who was one of Obama's top advisors and who was the director of the White House National Economic Council, handpicked a Harvard advisory team which orchestrated a massive fraud which financially pillaged the Russian people. When Moscow shifted from state to private ownership, a massive fraud created a criminal oligarchy that dominates the Russian state. According to the University of Ottawa economist Michel Chossudovsky, the Western banksters have stolen approximately $500 billion from the Russian people.